It's significant for everyone, just from managing your day-to-day needs for housing and food and your expenses. I think financial literacy is being able to use the tools and skills of financial management, of personal budgeting, tracking your income versus your expenses, and again, making those long-term goals, planning for them, be it retirement or education, or that huge trip that you want to take to Europe. You just need to, planning is key. And here's a documentary on the importance of financial literacy.
The U.S. markets plunged again today as investors worried about the economy and whether a recession could be on the horizon.
Trade wars, job losses, and a looming recession will only intensify a major financial challenge for America's middle class. Crippling debt. Americans are spending more than they earn. It's a pattern fueled by the psychological need for instant gratification.
We have never been taught how to spend our money wisely. We have never been taught how to do a budget to keep track of our expenses. So there you go. Learning about money is all through your experiences.
Compounding the problem is the fact that many middle-class Americans don't have the knowledge to make informed financial decisions.
Money, it's powerful like fire or like a drug. Like fire can either cook your food and keep you warm, or it can burn you and your family alive. A drug can either heal you and make you better, or it can turn you into an addict. So that relationship with money, I think, is important because most of us think about money several times a day, every day.
African Americans experience more money challenges than any other group. James Davis, a former defense contractor, had to battle challenges on the streets of Washington, D.C. because of poor money management.
And I think in our community, we tend to live beyond our means.
To curb the consequences of growing debt, we head back to school.
One day, when I was doing all this planning, I noticed my mom was doing the bills. I decided to look over her shoulder just to see what she was doing and how she was doing it. What I realized was that what she was doing was really, really complicated. And then it hit me. I have no idea how to do bills.
Financial literacy as a core curriculum in grades K through 12 across the United States could be the change agent to get the middle class out of debt.
The Congressional Budget Office said Tuesday it projects the annual budget deficit will hit $1 trillion this year and could hit a record $1.7 trillion by 2030. The CBO released a report projecting the deficit for the next decade, saying it looks like the deficit would account for 4.6% of the United States gross domestic product this year and would grow to 5.4% in 2030. If nothing changes, the debt would equal about 98% of the U.S. gross domestic product by 2030. That would be the highest ratio since World War II. The national debt is how much money the U.S. has spent that it technically doesn't have.
Spend now, pay later. A prevailing approach to money management that is deeply embedded into the psyche of the American consumer. While it is justified to pay for some items over time, applying the practice as a financial tool is exacting a heavy price from the core of America, crippling debt for the middle class. The group's financial vulnerability has reached a critical point.
Today, a majority of the middle class can't look their children in the eye. They don't believe they can say it's going to be okay. They don't believe that their child will do as well as they did. We've never, ever had that happen in America. We're no longer the wealthiest middle class in the world.
To understand how the wealth disappeared, we must examine the middle class on the basis of race, income, education, and debt. So who exactly is in the middle class? There is no universal definition of the class, but most Americans believe that they're in it. When asked, nearly 3/4 of the adult population in the United States self-identified with the middle or average class. This group can be identified by occupation, income, or social status. But for our purposes, we apply the Pew Research Center's definition of the middle class, which uses income to separate the groups. The think tank estimates 52% of adults lived in the middle class households in 2016, a number that has been holding steady since 2011. Those in middle class families earned between $48,000 and $145,000 in 2018. The income is revised upward for households that are below average in size and downward for those above average in size. This way, each household's income is equal to the income of a three-person household.
The images of highways nearly empty at rush hour and massive international airports sitting all but idle show us what we all know just by taking a drive outside of our homes these days. The world has gone quiet.
In 2020, the U.S. economy was hit by the biggest economic contraction ever recorded as a result of the pandemic. It has since bounced back strongly but hasn't regained all its losses. Many Americans are facing financial ruin because they didn't have a plan, according to business owner Gerald Riddick, for any medical emergency.
So one way not being taught financial literacy hurts many people is they just get into this herd of normalcy where you're just going to go to work, pay your bills, you save, but you spend, you get in debt, and because you don't know better, you can't really do better. So you have, fast forward from our generation, you and I, fast forward to right now and just analyze how are so many people doing with this pandemic. And that is one key way it hurts. We've had recessions, right, before this time, but this really hurt a lot of people because they weren't financial literate. They didn't have a plan. They didn't know what to do.
The variation of incomes in the middle class highlights a wealth gap between the races that has disproportionately burdened African Americans throughout history and continues to fortify financial instability in Black communities in 2020.
America has slowly, painfully transformed as a country, breaking down racial barrier after racial barrier.
I am very optimistic about the future. Frankly, I have seen certain changes in the United States that surprise me. So on the basis of this, I think we may be able to get a Negro president in less than 40 years. I would think in 25 years or less.
Wealth is different.
Wealth is where sort of past injustices breed present suffering.
I think the racial wealth gap speaks to the fact that we still have a long way to go to achieve ideals of equality in this country.
The racial wealth gap is a measure of the white family and the African American family that's right smack dab in the middle, the median.
The median white household's wealth, their savings, assets minus their debts, is $171,000. The median Black households is $17,600. And that gap is still growing and growing. Why?
Why? Because the legacy of slavery puts Blacks behind the proverbial economic 8-ball before their first job by reinforcing historical inconsistencies in earnings between Blacks and whites with each generation. The present is mimicking the past.
My research, part of it is about how wealth positions persist across generations. So as Camille alluded to, one reason that the racial wealth gap is as enormous as it is today is that Black and white children on average don't grow up in households with the same resources. So because of a legacy of discrimination, exclusion, inequality, the past really is the present. So because children's wealth positions tend to resemble that of their parents, we see a history that we can't really leave far behind. So with Brielle Bryan, who's an assistant professor at Rice University, she and I argued that about half of the gap in accumulation of wealth through early and mid-adulthood is attributable to these unequal social origins.
The generational difference not only impacts African Americans, but it continues to widen the wealth gap. It signals a great share of the nation's aggregate income is going to upper income households, and the share going to the middle class is shrinking. Upper income families were the only ones to build on their wealth from 2001 to 2016, adding 33%, while middle income families saw their net worth shrink by 20%.
Politicians on both sides of the aisle talk about supporting the middle class, but in the U.S., that group is shrinking. Pew Research Center data shows that in 1971, 61% of adults lived in middle-income households. By 2016, that number was down to 52%. So what income bracket were those people absorbed into? Before 2000, people leaving the middle class were more likely to join the upper class. But after 2000, the opposite was true. People were more likely to drop to the lower income group.
Nitra loves shopping for clothes and is not afraid to ask for a markdown if anything doesn't look right.
Also, if an item maybe has damage or if it's missing an item on it, missing a piece or a button, you can ask for a discount on those too.
I never write about myself, so I didn't embark on this project saying, oh gosh, I can't wait to write about my own failures, which is basically what the article is about. But really the spring of this piece was reading a news item about the Federal Reserve Household Economic Survey, in which they asked the question, if you had a $400 emergency, could you meet that emergency? And 47% of the respondents said that they couldn't meet that emergency without either having to borrow money or to sell something. And I read that item and I said to myself, well, who knew? But of course I knew, because many, many times in my life, and not just in the distant past, but in the unfortunate present, I couldn't afford those $400.
The harsh reality is that change is not happening because of deeply rooted practices when it comes to money. Knowledge passed from generation to generation reinforces learned behavior developed through trial and error rather than fact-based conclusions. Entrenched bias is crippling minorities' ability to prosper versus survive.
There's kind of a triple disadvantage for African Americans and Hispanics. They have lower levels of income and wealth on average, so that makes it harder to transition to homeownership. Even after you adjust for those differences, as many things as you can think of, there's still a race and ethnicity gap in transitions to homeownership. And then even among Blacks and Hispanics who do become homeowners, they benefit less in terms of wealth for every year that they're homeowners. So there's these multiple processes along the way, and that's an example of a recreation of the racial wealth gap today, not due to some legacy far ago of racial inequality. And last, because that kind of process, less access to resources that facilitate wealth, gaps that go above and beyond those resources by race, and then benefiting unequally from those resources, that persists across a number of different mechanisms of wealth inequality. So not just housing markets, but also places like school systems and the labor market. And so when you put all these things together, I think the takeaway is that localized, targeted policies, interventions will do something, but when you think about the racial wealth gap, like the answer is always yes. Is it the past? Yes. Is it the present? Yes. Is it housing? Yes. Is it income? Yes. Is it schools? Yes. Right? Is it how much we have? Yes. Is it how much we benefit? Yes.
While getting poorer, the middle class is also not prepared for unexpected life events like a national crisis. As the bills pile up, African Americans combat economic instability and an unrelenting health crisis that hits the Black community harder than any other.
Unfortunately, when you look at the predisposing conditions that lead to a bad outcome with coronavirus, the things that get people into ICUs that require intubation and often lead to death, they are just those very comorbidities that are unfortunately disproportionately prevalent in the African American population.
Not only is COVID-19 claiming more Black lives, jobs in the African American community are also disappearing at a faster rate as the entire country struggles. Department of Labor statistics estimate that nearly 28 million workers are either on unemployment benefits or have applied recently and are waiting to get approved while health officials wait for the impact of promising vaccines. As we wait for the economy to recover fully, 43% of blacks have had trouble paying their bills since the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, more than any other racial or ethnic group. Also, if you were in the room with two other people, one of you would have dipped into your savings or retirement accounts to make ends meet. One would have borrowed money from friends or family or gotten food from a food bank, while two of you would still be looking for a new job as savings dwindled.
This is the situation with debt. It is a real challenge for probably 75% of consumers in America. And this is why I have a challenge with folks saying prior to COVID, the economy was good. Prior to COVID, the economy was good for maybe 25% of Americans. It was not good for 75% of Americans because the other folks were just getting by. And then any type of catastrophe, which we had with COVID, the coronavirus, however you want to describe it, it just took it, exposed all of the challenges in our system.
Before the pandemic struck, the Caldwell family of Kansas City was just making ends meet. Derek was working as an electrician. Tiana was training office workers. AJ was looking forward to playing football after school.
If you go back to the beginning of March, were you busy? Was it slow? What was going on for you?
It was busy, and then it was just like everything just stopped.
You might say COVID-19 infected the family's finances. Their jobs dried up, exposing a stark reality. They had no safety net.
Were you able to save any money before the pandemic hit?
The Caldwell family's experience is a familiar scenario playing out across the nation. Leading indicators of social and economic well-being show that on average, Black Americans face much more difficult circumstances than their white counterparts. For example, Black Americans take home less income and are far less likely to own their homes and live shorter lives than white Americans.
Is income. Income is a big, big issue because the cost of living is constantly going up. For instance, now trying to buy a house in many markets around the country, especially in urban areas, for the average African American, it's just not obtainable.
A wealth gap, not enough money to meet monthly expenses, no plan for unforeseen medical emergencies, and no savings leaves the middle class, especially blacks, searching for ways to make up for economic shortfalls. The biggest crutch for extra income? Increasing debt. Consumer debt is money owed by individuals, not corporations. Some debt is avoidable, and all debt is not bad. For instance, many people do not have enough cash on hand to pay for a home, a new car, or for college. The problem has continued on the same trajectory for decades. Auto loans started doubling in 1982. Lower interest rates seduced consumers to borrow against their homes for extra resources. New home purchases also rose in the 80s, which triggered more costs. People were spending beyond their increased income and weren't afraid of piling on more debt in the 80s, according to a Washington Post article. In 2020, debt continues to rise despite economic challenges. In the United States, consumer debt rose to $4.1 trillion in June of 2019, an increase of 4.3%. Consumer debt is the total of revolving debt, credit cards, and non-revolving debt, car loans, personal loans, or student loans. Credit card debt sits at $830 trillion, driven by the 61% of Americans who now have a credit card. Mortgage debt hit $9.2 trillion by the end of the first quarter in 2019, while the average household debt is more than $135,000. The shocking total does not include mortgage debt, signaling an unsustainable drain on the middle class. Experian, another one of the three major credit monitoring agencies, reports that as the cumulative total grows, debt is reaching record highs in nearly every category, with student loan debt doubling. Why is this happening? We can point back to America's predisposition to buy things with money the country does not have. Consumers impersonate the mindset with the use of things like credit cards, a tool to buy things now and pay for them later. In a year engulfed in a pandemic, the middle class saw debt as a lifeline to replace what it was not earning.
From American Public Media, this is Marketplace. In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Risdall. Tuesday today, the 6th day of October. Good as always to have you along, everybody. An economy where 850,000 people, it has to be said, are losing their jobs every single week. 12.5 million people are unemployed, and 27 million people are on some kind of government unemployment assistance.
To survive, the middle class is putting expenses on credit cards with the hope of paying it off later. Some are using bank loans and lines of credit, and in some cases, taking on predatory lending practices like a payday loan.
From the trends you have seen, explain how critical it is right now, people's financial vulnerability based on debt.
People are, as I see it now, because of the economy and the impact it is having on really so many people who are essential in the workforce, but they don't have the basic knowledge of managing their personal finances, because prior to the COVID-19 challenge, over 70% of people were living paycheck to paycheck. So when we had this downturn, people were just thrown upside down.
However, there is more to the relationship with growing indebtedness than just bill payment. Our mental approach to money influences our spending habits. In 1994, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, a professor of psychology, philosophy, and neurology at the University of Southern California, developed his somatic marker hypothesis. His theory was originally developed to explain decision-making in people with injuries to the part of the brain that identifies risk. Damasio's premise is that this part of the brain may influence consumers to make money management decisions based on hunches or gut feelings.
It is emotion that allows you to mark things as good, bad, or indifferent by just a little teeny change, something that comes, for example, from our past experience with a certain kind of situation. But what we remember from the previous situation that is like that is not just the facts, and not just the outcome that it may be good or bad. We also remember whether or not what we felt was good or bad. And this is something that people need to understand, is that when you are making decisions any day of your life, and of course the options you make are going to produce a good or a bad outcome or something in between, you do not only remember what the factual result is, but also what the emotional result is. And that tandem of fact and associated emotion is critical. And of course, most of what we construct as wisdom over time
Excitement dictating spending is part of a larger psychological need in the Black community for validation of success. William Cheeks was the first African American to hold a senior management position at Equifax.
In all of my years of doing seminars and working with consumers, we have done without for so long. And here are some examples. We didn't grow up in households, most of us, where we talked about finances. We also, I remember growing up, because I grew up extremely poor. I saw people driving a nice car, and for me at that time, boy, they have some money. They are driving a nice car.
One of the 3 major credit monitoring agencies. Observing trends in consumer spending for the past 3 decades, Cheeks asserts that purchases in the Black community are not just based on a critical need, but created by how we define success.
Yes, I agree. I think that the middle class have this idea of, well, at least we're better than the poor, and they have the appearance of being rich, but obviously are not rich. That's why they're called middle class. And they have this, I want it now, and I'll deal with the consequences of buying it later, you know. And the difference is between the rich, the poor, and the middle class. The rich buy assets, but the middle class and the poor buy stuff.
I think in our community, we tend to live beyond our means. Just because you're making $30 an hour doesn't mean that you're gonna go out now and buy a BMW when you was driving a perfectly good Toyota.
Increased indebtedness in search of instant gratification or validation undermines consumers' financial stability or the ability to build wealth. Cheeks, Reddick, and James, who have all experienced financial vulnerability, promote increased discipline along with financial education to avoid money traps or the consequences of debt.
We're going to look at one of America's most resilient industries, payday loans. 1 in 20 households have taken one out at some point. It's a $9 billion industry, and payday loan outlets are all over the place.
There are more payday loan stores in America than Starbucks and McDonald's.
Payday loans are a deceptive trap for those living on the financial edge. The predatory lending practice offers a quick fix to a temporary problem, but creates even more economic chaos for unsuspecting consumers. Consider this. The loan period is relatively short, 14 days for about $300. The amount of interest is usually small, indicative of the loan size. However, the rates on these loans are typically very high, with annual percentage rates often in excess of 400%. While payday lending is illegal in some states, most states allow payday lending and regulate the terms of the loan. Riddick, a businessman and retired soldier, discovered early in his military career that payday loans put consumers in a deeper financial hole than their original economic shortfall.
I was, and that was just another soldier at the time introduced me to that concept, and so I thought it was cool, but I didn't even realize how much it was taken away from me and creating a further problem down the line. Now, I eventually broke away from it, but it took several months for me to really understand this is not working out. So here's what it was. It's not uncommon for us as young soldiers to, just spend all this money doing whatever we do, for fun, eating out, and we would run out of money before, a few days or sometimes a week or so before the next payday. So we would either try to borrow some money from the next soldier to get us through, or in my case, I was introduced to the payday loan, and there's a lot of them that hangs kind of right outside the gates of the posts, right? They're all over the place around most military posts.
Payday lenders, knock them out.
Okay.
They're first, because they're killing you.
Yes.
Erica, once you pay those 2 things off, never set foot in one of those places again.
While payday lenders target many different Americans, they tend to go after traditionally vulnerable populations. People without a college degree, renters, African Americans, individuals earning less than $40,000 a year, and people who are separated or divorced are the most likely to have a payday loan. And increasingly, many of these payday loan borrowers are young people.
So I went in and borrowed $100 with the agreement to pay back $120. But here's the problem with that. I still had the same habits every month. I would still run out of money early. So by me borrowing that $100 to pay back $120, as soon as I got my paycheck, now I have to start in a hole because I have to pay that money back as promised on payday, right? Hence payday loan. And then I would spend the rest of the money, but now it gets spent even earlier because I still had the same spending habits, just $120 less. So now I'm borrowing even more to get me through the longer time before the next payday.
My kids are applying my life learned lessons by not repeating some of the mistakes that I made as far as not following my own advice and advice that I had given them about making sure you know where every penny goes, accounting for, you know, the money that you spent.
James Davis grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a middle-class family with 9 siblings, eventually graduating in the top 5% of his class, receiving a Bachelor's of Science in Electronic Engineering. For 28 years, Mr. Davis worked as a contractor in defense electronics for the federal government, and he settled in St. Mary's County, Maryland. He thought he had his finances under control.
Life was pretty good, like I said, when I got my first job at Patuxent Naval Air Station as an electronic technician before I got promoted to engineer several years later. I actually bought my own home in 1984, a year before I got married. I had 3 kids in a 5-year period, and my wife, she was going to school to get her degree at St. Mary's College. And so we were just a young, growing family. And then when I became an engineer, I got an offer for a job that allowed me to travel around the world.
Davis, an admitted workaholic, excelled professionally and was able to afford the American dream.
And I provided for my family very well financially. They had a nice 5-bedroom house, 3 bedrooms out in the so-called suburbs, you know, no picket fence, you know. But then I bought some timeshare, some rental property in South Carolina. Had a rental home there that we rented out. And, you know, a couple other toys, you know, boats, stuff like that.
However, Davis's life was built on a financial house of cards. He earned money and his wife took care of the finances. Davis was unaware that one event would cause his world to come crashing down.
Right around 2000, 2001, both parents passed away in a 6-month period. And I was going through depression, you know, and I was grieving with both parents. Of course, my other 9 siblings were also. And then a year after that, one of my youngest sisters died from sickle cell disease. And my depression started to get worse, okay? And then my wife had had enough of me traveling and not being there, and she's taking care of everything, running everything basically. So she was basically running the finance. I would just review it and make sure everything was paid. We had some savings, we had, you know, the money for the kids' education was put away, the bonds that I had and the money that I had in different plans, IRA plan back then, for the kids' education, all that stuff was taken care of, you know. So my depression started to get worse, and then we ended up getting a divorce. And then I had an episode with depression where I was hospitalized.
Things continued to spiral out of control for Davis in every aspect of his life.
So they suspended my security clearance for a year, which means I couldn't work on a lot of secret projects because I had a top secret clearance. So they kept me because I workaholic, so I did desk work and that type of stuff like that. Then eventually I just went on retired. And by that time, the divorce came through. Of course, I had to move out of the house, so I moved in with my brother in Baltimore. And I didn't have enough savings to get a place.
Davis, a career professional, had gone from living in a 5-bedroom home, owning rental properties and boats, to sleeping in train and bus stations.
3 weeks I stayed at the train station, alternating between the Amtrak train station and the Greyhound bus station a couple of blocks away, until they found out I wasn't catching the bus either. And so most break of dawns, I'm walking downtown DC, with my luggage. So, I would call them. It was like I was calling them, to let them know, oh, I'm hanging out with a friend's house, or I'm visiting Sherman up here in Baltimore, but I never said where I was living at. I never said I was in a shelter. Yeah, I think so. I didn't say I live in Central Union Mission Shelter,
After visiting multiple shelters, Davis got a room here at Central Mission, a former faith-based shelter in Washington, D.C.
Second floor was the kitchen, and then they would bring stuff through here, brought the food, yeah, and then organizations would bring in food, different churches and organizations.
His time in the shelter opened Davis's eyes to a growing problem in the United States. The National Alliance to End Homelessness reported in 2020 that of the 70% of individuals experiencing homelessness, 60% were male, while Black Americans were more likely to be on the streets than the national average or white Americans.
I walked into a low barrier shelter. I was like, I can't live here because it was dark. They had light on, but it was dark. If you know what I mean, when you look at the people there, it was like, you look in their eyes, it was like no hope. It scared me. It really did scare me. And I'm like, how did I end up from a 5-bedroom house to here at that moment? How did this happen to me?
Davis had the resources to survive a financial crisis, but not the knowledge, which made him vulnerable.
I had no plan. It was only work, get money, find a place to stay. With my finances, just in survival mode. I had switched to survival mode. How I'm going to get out of this by myself.
So my question becomes, do you think a lot of people get into survival mode where they don't necessarily use financial literacy, especially in our community? When I know when I'm growing up, it's like, get a good job that's going to pay the bills, keep a roof over your head, keep food in the refrigerator. You're not necessarily talking about making that money grow while you're sleeping or anything like that.
I didn't have a plan. I didn't set goals. I didn't write down things like I used to do when I had a family, because I knew I was responsible for more than just myself. But when it was just me, I was kind of living recklessly with my money.
Did you teach your kids about financial literacy? Did you show them what they should do with their money?
Yes, I did. So they actually ended up opening up a savings account at a bank, and they liked it.
Davis now lives in a trendy neighborhood in Northwest DC. He works for the National Coalition for the Homeless and publishes a neighborhood newspaper to educate others who are homeless, promoting better financial planning as part of his life lessons.
I think that needs to be taught, particularly today. Like when I was growing up, it wasn't taught. It wasn't even talked about, even in the household. That was none of your business. That wasn't kids' business to find out where dad's paycheck going, how much dad's paying for rent and mortgage, how much dad's paying for this and that. That was kind of like, right.
Only adults know about that.
Exactly.
You figure it out once you get
exactly. It was only for adults. So I think that's something that's really needed. Financial literacy, some type of financial management course is needed at an early age, because that's, prepares you for life. This is a picture that I took of Obama at Camp David playing basketball with some former University of North Carolina and Duke players.
The correlating theme of all of the stories so far is a lack of knowledge about managing money, something that has plagued the African American community for decades.
Money wasn't something we really talked about. It was more considered like adult business. And the most minute piece of financial advice that I got was make sure you save your money, or make sure you save some money. But you couldn't ask about, well, why do you pay this much for bills? Where we grew up, you would see parents or adults counting money in different little stacks. And as a kid, I'm just like, can I have $5 or $1? They would say no, but what they would say was, this is bill money. And I remember one time I asked my mom, well, who's Bill?
Shielding emerging consumers from the family's financial reality only creates more challenges. Once on their own, many young adults are making decisions with long-term impact without the necessary skills to make choices in a dynamic marketplace. The consequences of this position can be life-altering, as evidenced by Davis.
When I was growing up, it wasn't taught. It wasn't even talked about, even in the household. That was none of your business. That wasn't kids' business to find out where dad's paycheck going, how much dad's paying for rent and mortgage, how much dad's paying for this and that. That was kind of like.
The economic burden grows each month. Nationally, more than 27% of black households are late paying their debts, compared to 15% of white households, even though black median debt is about half of white median debt. Also, just 40% of black households reported having good or very good credit, compared to 65% of white households. That leaves black communities with fewer good options.
And I had money to pay for a hotel, but I didn't want to exhaust all my resources.
Economic purse strings are only getting tighter as the cost of living is going up. The Economic Policy Institute's 2020 report contends that even though 2020 inflation rates are trending downward since the 2018 report on family budgets, earnings aren't keeping up with expenses. There are indicators that the trend of using debt to make up for economic shortfalls, late bill payment, and a lack of savings for emergencies will continue. To provide more evidence that things aren't changing when it comes to the financial insecurity of the middle class in America, we employ the International Futures Model to predict what will most likely happen in the next 30 years. IFS is a tool for thinking about long-term global futures. The objective of the software program is to answer 3 questions. Where are current trends taking us? What kind of future would we prefer? And how much leverage do we have to bring about that future? So we ran the numbers. The trend of some earning more than others, or the wealth gap, is confirmed and continues for the next 30 years. Skilled workers are represented by the teal dots in the graph, unskilled in pink. Income is measured in the thousands along the left side. We started in 2015 to show the historic pattern along with the predictions for household income. In 2020, unskilled workers earned about $25,000 a year. Skilled workers, about $120,000. Each group's income grows in 2030, but the gap grows in 2040. By 2050, an unskilled worker's income would be a little bit more than $30,000. The skilled worker is expected to be paid 5 times more. The Pew Research Center's 2020 income data confirms the wealth gap. The middle class earned on the low end about $50,000, while the top of the group earned almost $150,000. But what are Americans doing with the money? This chart shows projections for household consumption in ratio to household income. Unskilled workers are represented by the gray bar, skilled workers, the dark red bar. Americans will continue to spend more than we make. By 2030, unskilled workers will be spending 4% more than their income, in contrast to skilled workers spending 4% less than their paycheck, which leaves little money for savings or emergencies.
What I've looked at over my many years of being in the financial industry is I've dealt with people that made less than $25,000 a year and people that have made over $25,000 a year. And in a lot of cases, in those cases, I've deemed that it was not what they made, but it was how they used what they made.
To bend the arc of financial insecurity towards stability, We suggest implementing financial literacy as a core curriculum in grades K through 12 in the United States. Improved money management skills can slow or reverse the trend of growing debt and reduce financial fragility.
The current system that we have has put us in charge of deciding how much to save and how to invest our retirement wealth. If you think it is scary, it is. We have to make those decisions facing a lot more complex financial markets than in the past. And the labor markets have changed as well. They reward much more than before skills and education, but the cost of education has gone up, and now we also have to figure out how to finance our education. In other words, from the beginning of our career, in fact, even before we go to college, we have to make decisions about how much to borrow, how to save, how to invest, how to grow, and how to protect our wealth.
So before we get into the example, what is financial literacy? The dictionary definition would define financial literacy as the possession of the set of skills and knowledge that allows an individual to make an informed and effective decision with all their financial resources. In more plain English, it's the ability to figure out which financial decisions are the most likely to lead you to achieving your financial goals, and then having the ability to act on that knowledge.
Scholars provide wide-ranging definitions of financial literacy. Houston 2010 says that financial literacy is not only understanding the information, but the beneficial application of financial knowledge. According to Lusardi and Tufano, financial literacy is the ability to make simple decisions about debt contracts. Although there are many definitions and dimensions used to describe financial literacy, most of them refer to an individual's ability to obtain, understand, and evaluate financial information that is necessary to make an efficient decision to fortify the individual's financial well-being.
That would be the hope, absolutely. I mean, that's the hope of why I do what I do, in the hope that it will lead to someone's life being more stable and therefore influencing those around them.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think that's what financial education does. It's a hope. It gives people hope on something better and puts them on that path to achieving goals.
Financial fragility among the middle class, especially African Americans, is at a critical point where a change agent must be mandated. The lack of financial stability is also impacting the very students who could benefit from a personal finance course.
Yeah, and we hear that from teachers now too, is that, you know, a lot of students aren't showing up for school, and they reach out to the students and they discover their parents can't work. You know, they've got health risks. And so they're on the front lines, working at the grocery store, working at the fast food restaurant to provide for their family. So they're having to grow up very quickly, which again makes this sort of education even more imperative. Like, let's put together, if I'm responsible, I'm one of the primary breadwinners for my family, let's sit down and make a budget to figure out how we're gonna navigate through, because they are forced to grow up very quickly.
In the state of Virginia, there was not a mandate to teach personal finance in the school systems here within Virginia. So I was one of the first, part of one of the groups that lobbied together to encourage the community, our legislators, the Department of Education, to implement a graduation requirement for personal finance.
And this was the Department of Education for the university, for the
state of Virginia, correct. Right. So we went through that process, and we're happy to say a couple of years later, it did turn into a mandate. So it is a graduation requirement now for the state of Virginia for all high schoolers to take a credit in econ and personal finance.
And that's a step in the right direction. Cherry Dell is a former educator and now heads financial education for the Virginia Credit Union. and co-chairs the Virginia branch of Jumpstart. The organization celebrated 25 years of promoting financial literacy in December of 2020. Dell is furthering the group's efforts by teaching budgeting classes in underserved schools. She has seen firsthand how the lack of transparency is impacting how some youngsters in the Black community view money.
I was in the schools teaching, and I give each student a job, and they have to budget out their rent, expenses, and one of those expenses was groceries. And in this particular school, a young lady stepped forward and was like, well, my family uses the EBT card to pay for groceries. I don't need to budget for that. And I said, well, if you were to get this particular job, you would not qualify for that because you would be making too much money. And she looked at me and she was like, well, why would I even want to get that job then? And so here I am coming in and taking away the only thing that she really was familiar with when it came to paying for things in her life.
However, young adults are not the only ones lacking know-how. The Personal Finance Index, or the PFIN Index, was launched in 2017 to measure financial literacy levels and understanding in America. Scholars at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center at George Washington University co-developed the PFIN Index with the TIAA Institute. The PFIN Index provides insight into what topics Americans are struggling to understand. The survey gauges knowledge in 8 functional areas: earning, consuming, saving, investing, borrowing and managing debt, how insurance works, comprehending risk, and finding the right answers or information. Over the past 3 years, the number of right answers on the survey have increased by 1% each year. More than half of the survey questions were answered correctly. Financial literacy increases as household income increases. The difference between each successive income group is statistically significant. The gap in correctly answered questions between those with household incomes below $25,000 and those with household incomes of $100,000 or more is 27 points.
I recently started looking for temporary work too, just so I could get some inflow, some cash inflow. I stopped working, but I still have bills to pay.
GFlex research also revealed that household income, levels of education, and employment status also impact the strength of financial literacy among African Americans. For instance, personal finance knowledge tends to be greater among those with higher household income, while the unemployed or disabled know less about managing money.
We find that 45% of American households are financially fragile. There is a very, very strong correlation between financial fragility and financial literacy. Those who are more financially literate do better when it comes to financial fragility. Financial literacy is something that we can change and is actually empowering people. Of course, it comes with better regulation, it comes with better inclusion, but it also comes with equipping the people with the knowledge they need to better navigate this troubled water that we all face. And practically speaking, I really think that we need to put in place programs for financial education in school, in the workplace, in community.
Financial fragility is not just a problem in the United States, but is prevalent in the global community as well. Researchers observing Italy's middle class identified some of the same issues plaguing the United States. Researchers observing Italy's middle class concluded a growing number of families are facing difficulties in repaying secured and unsecured debt, which refers to mortgages, car loans, and credit cards, to name a few. Families are behind paying the rent, utility bills, and many are not prepared for unexpected expenses. So, like Americans, living from paycheck to paycheck.
On average, Brazilian families owe 45% of their income to the banks. Economist Jorge Nogueira, whom we met in Sao Paulo's banking district, says that's dangerous. He says the lower middle class in particular no longer has any purchasing power. In addition, very few of them still have a connection to money. Everything's bought with credit cards. That's why so many have gotten into debt, and the bank's conditions are especially harsh.
There's this old saying, don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. But that's just what the Brazilian banks are doing. Some credit card charges are so high, they border on profiteering. If you buy something with your credit card and then pay in installments, after a year you'll have paid 10 times the original value.
Consequently, the implementation of national strategies promoting financial literacy and the design of financial education policies and school mandates have become a high priority for policymakers around the world. Systems dynamics is a practice of breaking down the complex into variables. Once we understand how those variables influence each other, we can inspire change through adding or subtracting. This research proposes that sustained financial education can improve knowledge and mitigate the consequences of growing indebtedness.
Here's the thing, I think everybody at this point does feel like it's necessarily, financial education is necessary in the schools. I don't think people would come at you and disagree with that. I think the disagreement is around how it needs to happen, right? And the bureaucracy that comes with implementing something new within a core curriculum.
Stakeholders in the financial literacy space are seeing encouraging signs about the willingness to implement new courses into the core curriculum, according to a 2020 survey by the Council for Economic Education.
This is a momentum story for the Survey of the States. 5 new states have passed requirements in personal finance, 3 in economics. So we're seeing a rising tide and we see the momentum going.
So what does that actually, though, manifest itself in terms of what that looks like? Is that a class in high school? Is that a class in middle school? What does it mean?
So we objectively measure what states are doing, from whether they even have standards to having a full required class. So right now, 21 out of the 50 states require a course in personal finance for you to graduate. 25 require that in economics. And that's really important for all students so that they have access to this information. And that's another big part of this story, is who's getting access.
A net gain of 4 states since its last study 2 years ago, which means there's more work to be done. 5 states, Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, Ohio, and Carolina, added a financial literacy prerequisite. 1 state, Florida, dropped its requirement. The Council's report also noted variations in the scope of instruction. A standalone course taught for at least a semester is only available in 7 states.
The reason why I'm so passionate about this topic is that financial illiteracy matters and has severe consequences. Having collected so much data, we can now also study the effect of financial literacy on behavior. And what we found is it is those with low level of financial literacy that have more problems with debt, that don't take advantage of the opportunities offered by the financial markets, and who do not plan for retirement are less likely to accumulate wealth throughout their life. And financial literacy doesn't touch the individual only, it also affects society. The financial crisis has told us what are the severe consequences of having the wrong mortgage, and studies also show that it is those who had low financial literacy, in particular low numeracy, who are the ones having more difficulties with the mortgages and more likely to default on their debt and foreclose on their home.
Being financially literate is not only important for the well-being of consumers, but also for the financial system. Informed and sound choices are important for stability. If better financial literacy also leads to more sound financial behavior, we can expect fewer financial problems and ultimately fewer shortfalls in financial payments. So, by teaching financial literacy, we can reduce the stress of living paycheck to paycheck for the middle class, reduce rising debt and predatory lending practices against African Americans and others, and change behaviors toward money management. Remember, almost half of the country is financially fragile.
Will there ever be a day when you wake up where you don't have to think about money? How to make it, how to spend it, how to save it, and yet it's not an important enough topic for the classroom?
For insight on executing a plan to improve decision making, we visit with NextGen Personal Finance co-founder Tim Renzetta. 10 years ago, Tim visited schools serving low-income Black and brown students and discovered his mission.
And I just didn't find anything that was real world, that was practical, that was relevant, that would capture these students' hearts and their minds. And so I built it. And I wasn't the best teacher. I was not the best curriculum developer, but I can tell you those kids were jumping out of their seats. They were so anxious to learn. And then what really turned me on to the subject was when I started getting emails from parents. You know, students saying, parents saying, David came home, was really excited to talk about the stock market. I have not started thinking about investing for retirement. Can you help? And, you know, that story ends with the two of us at a brokerage office and dad setting up an IRA and the son watching. And all I could think of was, wow, this is powerful. Like, you do a great job teaching students. They're going to take these lessons home to their parents.
NextGen Personal Finance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to get a personal finance course in every high school by 2030. The group provides resources to students, teachers, and schools free of charge.
The lack of personal finance education that we have, particularly in the public school curriculum, is verging on criminal.
Kids tell me, I need to know this. I know that the world ahead is going to be complicated and I'm not prepared.
It's interesting that we teach students about business and how to handle money for businesses, but we don't teach them how to handle their own money first.
It's one of the hottest topics in education right now. It's one of the most vital. We've got to fix this, and we got to fix this now.
What's happening in our society is no longer a race issue, but a class issue. The only way that we provide a gateway to financial freedom and financial stability is through financial literacy and financial education.
Implementing financial literacy as a core curriculum across the country means change on multiple levels. Capitol Hill understands the need to improve the financial well-being of America's middle class.
Mr. Speaker, for a majority of American families, buying a home will be the biggest financial purchase in their lifetime. That is why this bill we are considering today is so important.
Representative Joyce Beatty joined Congress in 2013, representing the 3rd District of Ohio. She serves on the House Committee on Financial Services, which oversees the Federal Reserve. Before coming to the national stage, she spearheaded legislation to require financial literacy in Ohio's public schools.
This bipartisan bill would incentivize those prospective first-time home buyers to take a hold of their financial futures by taking a financial literacy class, while making it easier and a little cheaper for them to purchase that first home.
While leaders recognize the lack of knowledge, the remedy for the problem will come from the people, according to Renzetta. He agrees with the emergence theory of social change, a philosophy that believes social change bubbles up from the bottom rather than top down. The system consists of multiple agents, each operating to achieve a goal.
So, having talked to a lot of state leaders, boy, local control is the game. Don't you dare tell me what we need to teach. And I think the efforts have been more successful at the state level. And then you have Kentucky, you know, a teacher there, Alex Todd, he's in our documentary. He fought, he got Republicans and Democrats together to pass this bill, and such excitement. And at the 11th hour, they changed the word course to program. So suddenly 3 hours in front of a computer, an online computer, allowed people to check the box to say we've done personal finance. So the bet I'm making and the investment we're making is in teachers, because I want to fight bureaucracy at its weakest level. And that's probably at the individual school level. And is it going to take more time? Yes.
Research shows that kids who learn to manage money when they're young will be able to better handle their finances as adults. Yet up until recently, only 17 states required high school students to take a class in personal finance. Now, a new report from the Council for Economic Education found that the number of states that require a high school student to take a personal finance course, either a standalone class or integrated into other coursework in order to graduate, has risen to 21. 45 states now include personal finance education in their curriculum standards for kindergarten through 12th grade, although only 37 states require those standards to be implemented by local school districts.
It's never, ever too early to teach financial literacy. When a child can say, I want, and we know that they don't need, that's when it's time to start teaching financial literacy.
Maryland is one of the states requiring seniors to take a personal finance course to graduate. Rebecca Pearson, an 18-year veteran in education, is the Director of Career and Technical Education for public schools in Charles County, Maryland. Financial literacy falls within the category of career and technical education.
And I think it's exactly that. They realize the need. They realize that it needs to be part of a conversation for students, that it needs to be something that's normal. It's a life skill, that they can build on this and really learn and create and realize what's necessary as they get older. So we have it in every level in different facets. It's definitely stronger and more in depth at the high school level, where students can really relate to it a little bit further and make some aha moments, start to make decisions for themselves. We have it in elementary, middle, and high school.
Next Gen Personal Finance in Charles County employ a curriculum that closely reflects our proposed remedy for financial fragility due to rising debt. A program that builds over time versus a semester or single course approach to teaching financial literacy.
So in elementary school, it's in two different places. It's embedded within the classes in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And they have books that go along with it and lessons that go through different skills, exactly like you're saying. So, we've got the Maryland state standards for financial literacy. And so they're hit at every level, but obviously with a different level of intensity and understanding as we grow.
The mandatory money management course is part of the reason Angie McCrae moved back to Charles County, Maryland.
I grew up in Charles County. I grew up in Waldorf, moved away, and our family recently moved back in the fall of 2017. Mm-hmm. So the kids have been in Charles County schools since he was a freshman, and my middle child was starting middle school, and my youngest was in 3rd grade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did the fact that they taught financial literacy, was that a draw to these schools, or did you even know that was required here?
I didn't know it was a requirement, but once I learned, I was really pleased.
McCrae's son, William, is a senior at North Point High School taking the personal finance course.
So far we've learned about credit cards, APR, things like that. So tracking how much you spend and how much you can spend a month and then how to pay it back.
The school system fits the McCrae's plan that their children have strong money management skills for life on their own. Currently, the family lives in a quiet neighborhood in Charles County, Maryland. Angie and her husband are married professionals with 3 children, fitting the baseline definition of a middle-class family with an income between $50,000 and $150,000 a year. The McCraes have avoided some of the pitfalls of financial vulnerability by implementing strict budgeting and savings rules while teaching best practices to their children.
So you really have to start looking at how much you have saved up for your place and what you're going to use as an emergency fund. Yeah, but you still have to put some towards it. You have to furnish your place. You have to, make sure you have enough saved for an emergency in case something happens.
North Point High School is reinforcing what William is learning at home in the classroom, while other students are providing tangible evidence of the program's success by sharing their experiences and personal growth.
As I was talking to some of my older friends, they don't even know what APR is, so I realized that this class is gonna eventually help me, so it's good. So like she said, debt. So we talked about how with debt, you're only gonna go deeper. It's kind of hard to get out of it once you're in, especially when you're in credit card debt, because the way that they add fees on, it makes it a lot harder to pay it back, especially over time.
Specifically, but we do have our students, they have an end of year exam. They have a pre and post assessment that's standardized so that we can see that growth in knowledge. So we do know the success in what they're learning throughout the school year. We can look at that. The rest, I guess, comes from testimonials. And truthfully, this being a virtual school year has been very interesting too. So for one, just speaking to students and having them reflect on when they took that financial literacy class. You have those conversations pretty often, and they do speak of the benefit. They're like, oh yeah, and it's not that it's a difficult class. That's interesting. It's not hard. It's not super challenging, but it is eye-opening, and it's a great base. And that's what they speak about, the fact that this isn't, as they're entering into the world, is they're the first time they've heard or realize these different things that they're going to need to do with their finances or as they are moving forward in the world.
Actually, from an early age, my husband and I have been talking to all our kids about money and spending and saving and debt. When my husband and I got married, we had debt together, and we quickly used principles that we learned through our church and other means to eliminate that debt. And so we were very adamant about, having as little debt as possible and just teaching our children the principles of money management and just, how debt can really, ruin you. It's critical so that we can pass wealth down to our children, so we can buy property, so we can start businesses, so we can, so they can have quality of life.
The McCrae story demonstrates another value for the larger community. Financial literacy is preparing the McCrae's children to not rely on debt like credit cards or loans to fill income gaps or to make unnecessary purchases. From this real-life outcome, we can hypothesize that improved financial education leads to less debt, the overall problem we're examining. Our earlier projections indicate that less consumption could impact the amount of savings in a household. If savings are available, the more prepared a family will be for unforeseen emergencies like a pandemic or medical costs. Improved financial stability means fewer people falling victim to predatory lending like payday loans, or African Americans being able to afford or keep a home and not end up sleeping in bus stations simply because they didn't know what they didn't know.
Financial literacy is extremely important. I mean, it's the base. It's the base of everything. We've learned that we need to go to college, we need to get a job, but then going to college and getting a job, financial literacy to me is on that level, because if you have a job and you don't know how to manage the money that you have, you will be stressed. Stress brings on health issues, and it's just a vicious cycle.
There are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. From my point of view, no label and no slogan and no party and no skin color, and indeed no religion, is more important than the human being.
The goal of this is not about bigger bank accounts, but social justice. Justice in terms of equality. Justice in terms of the equal distribution of wealth, privilege, and opportunities in a society for all. We're not there yet. Middle-class families in America across the world are experiencing difficulties that are the result of a lack of financial knowledge, income disparities, and a legacy that sentences some to a life of economic hard-knock lessons, especially African Americans, who are more likely to never own a home before they die, the cornerstone of generational wealth. If we recognize the dynamics of the problems of debt, we can manipulate those variables to change the course of action. A sustained and comprehensive financial literacy curriculum in grades K through 12 can be the difference maker between economic stability or life on the streets. Just ask James Davis, who reached the pinnacle of his career. Projections from the International Future Model show that debt will continue to rise. Americans will continue to spend more than they earn. They will continue to rely on debt to make up for what they don't earn on their jobs. Consequently, African Americans will shoulder the burden of debt more than any other group if we do nothing. Financial literacy is a start. Dr. Anna Marie Lusardi of GFLEC once said, and I'm paraphrasing, if we are to learn a language to be able to survive in society, shouldn't we learn financial language in order to survive in the financial market, especially in a place where decisions can impact the rest of your life? We're not there yet. 21 states like Maryland and Virginia require a personal finance class for graduation, which may explain why nearly half the country is financially fragile. 21 out of 50. We're not there yet. Organizations like Next Gen Personal Finance and Jumpstart demonstrate that a change will come from a grassroots effort, the emergence theory of social change. Change comes from the bottom up instead of the top down. Different people working in different spaces for the same purpose, financial literacy for all. Instituting financial literacy as a core curriculum is also a fight to close the wealth gap between blacks and whites. Right now, the white household makes 10 times as much as the black household. It is also a chance for the middle class to be able to purchase a home, to have savings for an emergency, and not to face financial ruin with every purchase. The United States, the global community, we're at a critical point before the pandemic. In 2020, it got worse. Millions lost jobs, small businesses were destroyed, and living from paycheck to paycheck became living on borrowed time. So doesn't it make sense that we have to teach consumers how to manage money better? Everyone's not going to be rich. Everyone's not going to own a business or have multiple streams of revenue. We must educate to change behavior. Financial fragility has the world in a precarious position. However, there are positive signs nestled in communities, households, and schools. But as a whole, we're not there yet. So the question becomes, should financial literacy continue to be a benefit for those who have access to resources, classes, and programs, or a right for all?